After a few hundred rounds, the Sig Rattler is easily becoming one of my favorite compact rifle setups. Here we have the 300 Blackout version with a 6 3/4 inch barrel. This is easily one of the coolest rifles I've seen. It's super small, it's easy to throw a can on. It's definitely one of the quietest ones that I have shot. We've only shot supersonic ammo through this and it is mind-blowingly quiet, and we'll get into why that is later. But this is not a cheap gun. Coming in at $2,700. This is substantially more than most AR-15s. So we're gonna get into why that is and what makes this gun so special. This is the difference between a 14.5 inch 5.56 and this 300 Blackout. This is about 2 inches shorter than the 14.5 with a 7-inch can. So this is super small for a rifle setup. It's also really light. And when you collapse the stock, it's pretty much the perfect size bag gun. Super small. If you had a QD suppressor on here, it'd be significantly smaller. But even with the can, it'd be a really good truck gun setup. There's a reason you don't see a lot of 5.56 rifles in this barrel length of 6 3/4. And with a 5.56 round, you just need that velocity and that barrel length to get the round to stabilize. With 300 Blackout, you can go a lot shorter and still get pretty good velocity. If you don't know what 300 Blackout is, it's essentially a 308 bullet or 30 cal bullet stuffed into a 5.56 cartridge. So it looks really weird. It is a phenomenal round, both with ballistics and velocity out of these short barrels. That's kind of why a lot of people are going to this cartridge, is if you're gonna SBR something, you don't want all this extra length. You really don't need it too much with a 300 Blackout. So when you compare it to a 5.56, there's not a whole lot that's gonna stand out that's different here. The overall length is gonna be almost identical. It's just gonna be a little bit shorter. And obviously you can see that 30 cal bullet in there is a lot bigger. When you compare the 300 Blackout to the 308, that's where you see a huge difference both in the diameter of the casing and the length. You can see that this is a lot shorter. It's also going to be a lot smaller in diameter. Both these cartridges may use the same bullet, but they're kind of in a different class. While 308 or 7.62 by 51 is awesome, it also usually uses a much bigger gun and the ammo weighs a lot more. What's special about 300 Blackout is it essentially fits in a 5.56 sized magazine, so you don't have these huge magazines. They'll fit all 5.56 placards, which is really nice. And it's just gonna be a lot lighter. One thing to note about a 300 Blackout over a 5.56 is it is gonna have a little bit more recoil. It's not super noticeable, and really it's not gonna affect anything. I don't think it would really affect my split times or my drill times, but after shooting a couple hundred rounds in one day, you'll definitely feel it a little bit more than a 5.56. It's actually much more comparable to a 7.62 AK-47 style rifle. It's not a huge note, but it's definitely worth noting it does recoil a little bit more than a 5.56. So now you guys know what a 300 Blackout is. Let's go ahead and show you guys what this rifle has on it. Currently we have the Diligent Defense Enticer can on here. This is the titanium can, super light, like ridiculously light and super effective. I was getting quite a bit of gas in the face. We only shot supersonics through this and it was ridiculously quiet. I plan on getting some subsonics to shoot through this and see how much of a difference it is in both noise and gas. We'll let you guys know in a community post later how this does with subsonic ammo, so make sure you guys subscribe for that information. Moving our way down, we have the Surefire ProTac. This is what I'm gonna change. This is not a bad setup, but I don't like how far it's sticking off the can. If I were to do this again, I would throw an Airsoka light bar on here, extend this light out a little bit further and get it closer to the can. But we're actually gonna be throwing the Sig Romeo rifle light on here. I believe that's what it's called. Just to see how it does. We haven't done any testing with it. We got one, so we'll probably throw that on in the future. We're also running a BCM vertical grip on here. I really like the way these pitch forward. It's kind of a more aggressive hand stop for me. Rather than flipping this and having it angled down, for some reason, I just prefer angled forward. It's just a very aggressive stop. And it's kind of necessary on here. With how short this rail is, your hand comes dangerously close to touching the muzzle device or the can, and obviously those gases coming out of a muzzle device would not be good really close to your fingers. So a can kind of helps extend it, reduce some sound, reduce some flash signature, kind of a really good setup for a can. But nevertheless, it gets really hot. Within 20 rounds, you can really feel the heat's cooking off this barrel and can. So this is about as far forward as I would go with this hand stop. Looks really good, performs really good, no complaints there at all. I kind of wish Sig would have thrown more M-LOK in here instead of these custom cuts. I could have gotten away with using one of our new products that we're coming out with, which is going to be a cable management system. We weren't able to do that on here, and we had to use a zip tie, which was kind of annoying. I wanted to use our system on here because these cables just get loose, and with how tight this is and how hot everything gets, I don't want that cable to accidentally touch the can or the barrel. And sometimes you'll see with these short setups, it'll actually cook the zip ties right off and they'll burst. Our system would have been nice to throw on here, but we really couldn't get away with it. With these random proprietary cuts, it would have been nice to see M-LOK in there. On top, we have an EOTech. I like this optic a lot. It's a very comfortable height. I really like this setup because I can move this a little bit forward and throw a magnifier on here if I wanted to reach out. 300 Blackout is perfectly capable of reaching out pretty good distance. So if I wanted to make this a little bit longer of a setup, I could do that no problem. If you're really trying to save some weight, maybe an aim point would do a little bit better on here. Hollow Sun has some really good rifle options as well. But the EOTech is kind of heavy. To me, this is a really light build, so I'm okay with sacrificing a little bit of weight for this EOTech. There's a couple really nice features on the center of this rifle. Kicking it off is this bolt release. I really like this for when you're doing a reload. I haven't used it a whole lot, and frankly, it's probably because of training. I'm so used to using an AR-15 and hitting the lever on this side. When you look at bad levers, I think they were in a much better position for an aftermarket accessory. This feels a little high. When I'm doing a reload, I always kind of flare the gun up. My finger naturally kind of has to break grip a little bit because this trigger guard is digging into my hand. It just feels high. So when I would insert a mag, I kind of felt myself fishing. This dust cover kind of gets in the way as well. I would have liked to seen this extend out a little bit further and down a little bit more. You're kind of hitting this dust cover and this brass deflector. It's just a little too tight. I understand from the standpoint of not accidentally locking your bolt back, but this just is not in the ideal position. It works really good. It's not too hard to push. The lever actually does its job, but I just wish that would have been a little bit lower. The safety on this is really nice, very tactile, doesn't feel spongy like you get with some AR-15s. Kind of expect this out of a $2,700 gun, but nevertheless, feels really good. The trigger on this also feels really nice for a rifle trigger. Probably not my favorite. Honestly, I think there's a couple Geisleys that do a little bit better, but we'll go ahead and kind of walk through this. There's quite a bit of take up for a rifle trigger, but the brake is really nice. It's a rolling brake, so it could take some getting used to. It's not like a Geisley trigger, in my opinion. Feels different. And then the brake is super tactile. Had no problem shooting it. Didn't feel weird pulling the trigger. I would definitely say it's a premium trigger. Everything feels really smooth on it. There is just a little more take up, and then the brake is a little different than what I'm used to. But all in all, super nice trigger. The Rattler does have an ambidextrous charging handle, which is really nice. I think it's the exact same one that was on the MP320. To me, it looks identical. It does feel a little small, which this whole gun is small, so that kind of makes sense. But comparing it to the Aero Precision ambidextrous, you can just see how much smaller that is over the Aero. Not a big deal. I had no problems using it, so to me it feels like a pretty good size. Just know it is on the smaller side. Ambidextrous safety on here, which is nice. Kind of expect that out of Sig now. It does have this weird smaller grip on there. I don't really think I'm a fan of this. It kind of makes sense for what they were going for since this is a CQB rifle, but to me, I just really don't like this part. This feels good, but the way it sweeps forward just kind of binds, puts a lot of pressure on my knuckles in this trigger guard here. So I might be swapping this out for a mag pull grip at some point. I see the aesthetic they were going for, but for me, it just wasn't super comfortable to shoot. Had a lot of tension in my knuckle here. We did opt for the pistol version. This did not come with this stock. We went ahead and SBR'd it and put it on there. This is actually the MCX stock on here, and I like this a lot. This aesthetically is beautiful, which is kind of weird to say about stock, but it's super slim. It looks really good, and it's a folding stock, which is really nice. One thing I can say about this folding system is it folds a lot easier than the Sig Spear. It does not take much effort to pull this up and flip this down. And then once it flips down, it is very sturdy. It does take some pressure to get it to come out. Not very much though. It's just the perfect stock to make this a super small setup. Even with the stock fully extended, you can see it's not hitting the rail. So this is definitely thought out. It's super slim. It's not very thick up against the gun. There's no gap. So this is just a really good system. So good on Sig for that one. So when you're looking at a rifle setup like this, really what comes to mind is a duty rifle, a CQB rifle, or a truck gun, potentially even a home defense setup. Frankly, I think it's a perfect setup for all of those. In my opinion, there's different classes of firearms. Most of it ranges around the barrel length and caliber. When you think about it, this is kind of a really good middle ground. Nobody's gonna be using this as a recce rifle. Really, the 300 Blackout doesn't have great velocity comparing it to a 5.56, but it has a lot more foot-pounds of energy. If you really want to dump more energy into somebody at closer distances, this is where this excels. So a truck gun setup, a home defense setup, a CQB setup, you're just gonna get better ballistics out of a shorter system. So when you think about it, where you're gonna use a rifle in close quarter combat, those are kind of the three areas you would use it. When you think about the system length, you're gonna want something compact. If it's a home defense setup, it's probably in a bedside safe. Usually those safes are on the smaller side. You're not gonna have a 32 gun in your bedroom typically, but for me, this would be perfect to throw in a small hidden compartment I have in my house. It's very small. I can grab it relatively quickly. You know, even a 14.5 AR-15 is just substantially longer. And you guys all know why CQB rifles are important. If you have a long rifle and you try to clear a doorway, it's just gonna be running into the door frame. So obviously the smaller, the better. So I think this is pretty much perfect for a home defense gun. And there's a lot of conversation about sound. A lot of people say with a home defense setup, especially I believe with Warrior Post Society, he thinks potentially a louder gun the better, striking fear into your enemy, so to speak. And while there is some truth to that, I really don't see why a can on a home defense gun is a bad thing. It's gonna be loud regardless. Even a supersonic 300 Blackout inside your house is gonna be loud. If you use subsonics, of course it's gonna be a lot quieter, but it's still gonna be loud. It's not Hollywood quiet. So I think this setup would be perfect for home defense. For a truck gun, I would probably get a QD setup for a can. I would throw this in a locked gun case in my truck, and then if you need to, you can throw the can on a situation. Worst case, you just grab the rifle without the can. That's a pretty good truck gun setup. It's incredibly small. 300 Blackout is a very capable round. While I'm never gonna be doing CQB unless I have to use my rifle in my house, this would probably be the ideal CQB setup. This gun is super capable out to a couple hundred yards. If I ever have to use a rifle, it's probably gonna be well within 200 yards. So frankly, I think this is one of the better options. And Sig isn't the only one making 300 Blackout. There's a lot of AR-15 builds that are doing it. I think they just put this in a really nice package. You don't have to buy aftermarket accessories to get your stock to fold and fight the AR-15 buffer style. I just really like this recoil assembly. Sig did a really good job with the MCX lineup, and this is just a very compact setup of that. So who's the Rattler for? I think it's for the person that has the money to afford this and already has a couple AR-15 setups and they want to take it up a notch. Like I said earlier, a folding system on an AR-15, you could basically build this entire setup, very similar length, for probably half the cost. You're just gonna have to get a LAW tactical folder and you can pretty much get away with this. I think that's kind of cool about this over a LAW tactical folder is you could shoot it with the stock collapsed. I don't really know if that's gonna be necessary in a lot of cases. So for somebody that's gonna be using this for home defense or CQB, you can probably build an AR-15 for quite a bit cheaper. What's really nice about Sig is you get this integrated lever, you get this really nice gas system with this folding stock. It's adjustable. There's a lot of higher tier technology, so to speak, going in on this, rather than your standard gas impingement AR-15. This is a very high-end rifle, and if you can afford it, I think that's great. And honestly, if you can afford this from the get-go, it's not a bad option to make this your one gun that can do everything. If you don't own an AR-15 and you can afford this $2,700 bullet, so to speak, I would probably do it. This is a very good setup, both in 5.56 and 300 Blackout. That is a very versatile setup. Now, if I was gonna go 5.56, you might wanna go a little bit longer on the barrel. That's just me, I'd probably go a 10-inch setup, but this is one of the more ideal rifle setups. And if I could only pick one rifle, it's not gonna be the Sig Spear, it's not gonna be a 14.5, it's probably gonna be this one because it's quiet, it's small, and it's very light. But if you're on a budget, you can basically build this with an AR-15 setup for probably half the money. So definitely keep that in mind when you're looking at this. If you guys like this video, we'd appreciate a like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.